With Bear Bachmeier in line to be BYU starting quarterback this fall, we can look back at the history books to tell us exactly what to expect from him as a true freshman starter.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, executive producer of the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City, Utah, and a 14-year credentialed media member at BYU. I am your resident expert and insider, your host here on this podcast, and as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Coming up on today's show, we're going to talk about Bear Bachmeier. If he is indeed BYU starting quarterback this fall, and hint, he is. We'll talk about what to expect from him as a first-time true freshman starter, looking back at three former quarterbacks who did the exact same thing he's doing. We'll also talk about defensive line. John Taumueapea has been one of the pleasant surprises of training camp for BYU, and he'll explain in an exclusive interview what's allowed him to be so effective this fall. Then we'll finish up today's show with a trio of high school studs that showed out last Friday night. They're all BYU commits, and why Cougar fans should get excited for the future of the BYU football program based on their performances. All of it's brought to you today by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today. Create an account, redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download that app today and get started with our friends over at Game Time. All right, let's talk about BYU quarterbacking, and history is going to tell us what to expect from a guy like Bear Bachmeier. Now, he is going to make history should he suit up for BYU in less than 2 weeks' time as a starting quarterback against Portland State, as he'll be the first ever true freshman to start the season opener for the BYU football program. There have been a number of freshmen that have played for BYU and started games as quarterbacks, but none of them have been out there for the very first snap of the entire season. That's what Bear Bachmeier will be doing if he indeed is going to do that just over a week from now. The bigger point is we can look back at least at three recent examples of guys who started as freshmen for the BYU football program for a bit of an insight as to what to expect from these players. Now, a lot of them, the stats are crazily enough pretty solid. Some of them, they're actually the highlight of their entire career, but we'll talk exactly what to expect from each of these quarterbacks. I want to start off by looking back at the first one. That's Jake Heaps. Now, Jake Heaps came to BYU as the number one quarterback in his class, as we all know, and was a guy that Cougar fans were ecstatic to have in the program. Well, he comes out as a freshman, splits time with Riley Nelson, ends up didn't split time with Riley Nelson. That came after the fact. He ends up starting 13 games in 2010 as a freshman at BYU, going 219 for 383. That's 57.2% completion percentage, 2,316 yards, 15 touchdowns against 9 interceptions. So fairly solid numbers. Now, the season results for BYU that year, 7-6. Very much a mixed bag. Had some highlight wins, obviously, beating Washington in their season opener, but also absorbing losses like the loss to Florida State in that season. They also lost to Nevada. So you look at it up and down, obviously playing in the Mountain West, their final year in the Mountain West Conference. And there was a lot of hope that Jake Heaps was just kind of starting when it came to that. Now, the season after that, as we all know, Riley Nelson split time with him, and then he decided to enter the transfer portal, goes to Kansas, spends time at Miami as well. And the highlight of his career, the best stats he ever had as a college quarterback, his freshman year at BYU. So interesting one there. Let's fast forward a few years and get to Tanner Mangum. Now, Tanner Mangum came home off of a mission, was going to be BYU's backup quarterback because in 2015, Taysom Hill was expected to be the guy for the BYU football program, and it sure appeared that was going to be the case in the first few stanzas of that Nebraska game. Remember, Taysom Hill looked absolutely dynamic, showed off an ability to play more from the pocket, and then on an ill-fated scramble, tears his Lisfranc. Well, in comes Tanner Mangum. He ends up throwing that incredible Hail Mary to save the win against Nebraska. The following week has the other Hail Mary against Boise State. And the ultimate season for BYU, very solid, 9-4 overall. Remember, the hype around that team was pretty high. Now, you lost at Michigan and at UCLA. Those are very tough losses. The Michigan one in particular, because there was some issues in terms of the overall game plan, getting into Michigan late, and obviously an ill-fated decision to have the firesides that Bronco Mendenhall used to hold. They got some people upset when they lost that game. They also lost a neutral site game to Missouri, and then finished off the season, as we all know, in that Las Vegas Bowl against Utah, which was an absolute barn burner albeit a loss. You look at the stats for Tanner Mangum, he's the best of these freshman quarterbacks because essentially started the entire season outside of that very first game against Nebraska, goes 267 for 446, so 59.9% completion percentage, 23 touchdowns against 10 interceptions. So very solid numbers, a pretty solid season. And then let's fast forward just a while later to a guy by the name of Zach Wilson. Now, Zach Wilson ultimately took the job away from Tanner Mangum. Remember, Tanner Mangum started that 2018 season as the starting quarterback. Then BYU in Game 7 ultimately decided to turn the reins over to Zach Wilson. Well, he produced 120 out of 182 passing. That's a 65.9% completion percentage, 1,578 yards, 12 touchdowns against 3 interceptions. So every one of these are fairly solid. Now, in his games that he played for BYU, he was 5-4 for BYU. Speaking of his freshman campaign, speaking of Zach Wilson, he did absorb 2 pretty tough losses. Remember that Northern Illinois loss, 7-6. Also a tough loss at Boise State, 21-16. That was marred by the end of that game, and then losing to Utah, 35-27 in the stretch run of that year. But then, as we all know, capped the season with an incredible 18 for 18 performance in the famous Idaho Potato Bowl against Western Michigan. So mixed bag of results. So what do we take away from all this? If you look at the stats for each of these quarterbacks, if you look at what Bear Bachmeier is going up against, because none of these quarterbacks that I've just listed ever face the same type of opposition that Bear Bachmeier is going to face, obviously, with 10 Power 5 opponents on the docket. I would say probably I was at 10 or Mangum probably had the most, but the bigger point is you can expect somewhere between the high 50s completion percentage wise. And if he hits what Zach Wilson did, 65.9% completion percentage, albeit that's about 7 starts for Zach Wilson among the 9 games he played in 2018. He gets anywhere near that 66% completion percentage. That's going to be pretty darn elite. I think I would expect it to be probably high 50s, low 60s. But if he can produce a touchdown interception ratio that's what these guys are pointing out, 12-3 in the case of Jake Heaps. Like I said, it was, let's see, what are we looking at here? I'm looking at the wrong thing for Jake Heaps as I'm going through these. That was 15-9, so he had the worst disparity. And then Tanner Mangum was 23-10, if I recall correctly. Yeah, 23 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. If you can do that, that's actually a very, very solid stat line. That's actually very close to what we saw from Jake Retzlaff a season ago. And a number of you out there believe that if he can replicate, speaking of Bear Bachmeier, what Jake Retzlaff did a season ago for the BYU football program, you believe that BYU can replicate what they did a season ago. So history tells us to expect, I guess, some Jake Retzlaff-esque numbers, but at the same time, the hype around Bear Bachmeier, it's going a little bit crazy. Some of you are comparing him to some great quarterbacks of yesteryear. I would caution about heaping too much on this young man's shoulders early on in his career, because history tells us, even outside of those 3 quarterbacks that I just listed for BYU, the freshman quarterbacks routinely have a really tough time really getting settled in. Now, the early part of BYU's schedule is the perfect one, I think, to break in a guy like Bear Bachmeier against, but how quickly can he get adjusted? How quickly can he really become the leader that BYU needs from their quarterback? And ultimately, how many wins versus how many losses will come as a result of all that? History tells us it's a decent 9-4, 7-6, or in the case of Zach Wilson, it was 5-4 as a starter in that freshman campaign. So it's bowl eligible, it looks like. In the high end, you're 9-4. So not awful, but also not exactly what we saw last year with an 11-2 year and a number 13 final ranking. But it's what we can take from history is that you can expect, I guess, Jake Retzlaff-esque type numbers from a guy like Bear Bachmeier if history is going to hold true, if he ends up being BYU starting quarterback this fall. All right. A guy, or among a group of guys, who's been making life very difficult for Bear Bachmeier in practice is John Talmoya-Payau. He's called JT by a lot of his teammates and coaches at BYU. He's actually emerged onto the scene as one of the key rotators, if not an outright starter for BYU defensive tackle this season. And how has he accomplished all of it? Well, he'll explain in an exclusive conversation coming up next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Drip Drop. If you're trying to stay on top of your routine, whether that's workouts, long days on campus, or staying focused between back-to-back classes, hydration is where it all starts, and that's where Drip Drop comes in. I can tell you hydration is absolutely incredible. When I'm on top of it, I feel like I'm on top of the world, quite literally. Your energy, your mood, your focus, even your skin. But getting enough fluids is not always that easy, and that's where our friends at Drip Drop come in. It is doctor-developed and scientifically proven for fast hydration. Uses the perfect balance of sodium electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb fluids quickly, delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half of the sugar of the leading sports drink. So obviously, if you guys want to get started with this and be more and better hydrated, well, keep a few in your backpack or whatever you happen to carry around on a daily basis. It saves you more than once from that midday crash because it keeps your hydration in tip-top shape. So right now, Drip Drop is offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first order. Just head to dripdrop.com. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege to get started. That's dripdrop.com. Promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Stock up now before the heat hits hard. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Big thank you to all of you for tuning in. I was up in Idaho over the weekend. I want to give a shout out to the Pool family for hosting us. Had family up. I've got family that lives up there. Had a baby blessing, so I was up in southeastern Idaho and had a great time hanging out with the Pool family. And I know that they listen to the podcast fairly regularly, so give you guys a quick shout out to all the Pools, including my sister Emily. All right, let's talk about BYU defensive line play now. Been a big part of training camp when Jay Hill, after that very first scrimmage for BYU, came out and said the pass rush looks really good right now, unquote. That was obviously some big news for a number of us out there who've been watching BYU football for the past decade or so without a single guy who's been able to produce double-digit sacks. Now, obviously, that's not the end-all, be-all for a defense, but a lot of us out there, yours truly included, would have given a lot to have an effective pass rush in many of these past seasons for BYU, going back, to 2015, roughly. The nice part is, if this is indeed the case, that BYU has a better pass rush, Jay Hill's defense is going to be that much more ferocious, that much more effective, and just frankly, they're going to be even better than they were a season ago, and we all know how good they were a year ago. I think the bigger point is it looks like as you get Bear Bachmeier, settled in as BYU's quarterback, you're going to need the defense to really lean on these opposing teams and really keep their scores down. And I'm looking at the likes of a Portland State in just under 2 weeks' time. You got Stanford coming in with a full rebuild underway with the Cardinal. Then you got to go to East Carolina, and then your first 3 Big 12 opponents are considered to be lower bottom half of the Big 12 type teams. There's a major opportunity for BYU's defense to, as I said, really hold these opponents down and allow BYU's offense to kind of find itself, allow Bear Bachmeier to find his footing, and hopefully lead BYU to a number of victories. 6-0 is not out of the realm of possibility in terms of a start for BYU, and they'd be nationally ranked, absolutely, if that were to be the case leading in to that rivalry game against Utah. But even if they're not, if they're 5-1 and 4-2, I still believe BYU's defense is going to be that much better, and it's going to be aided by a very, very strong defensive line. Now, Keanu Tanavasa takes headlines. Guys like Logan Latui, Bodie Schoonover have had their moments in training camp. Tausili Akana, Hunter Clegg, all of them have made impressions. But a guy I think that is getting overlooked in all of this is the man they call JT. His name is John Talmoiapea. I remember many of you might recall he came to BYU by way of Snow College, and he played defensive end before enrolling at BYU, but is now bulked up and is now playing defensive tackle. He had multiple moments down the stretch run of last season where he stood out to me on the football field, but during spring ball this year, and obviously training camp most recently, he's really taken it to another level. And with Justin Kirkland still on the mend, coming back from a knee injury that BYU's been really kind of hemming and hawing on when to expect him back, JT's taking advantage of the opportunity. I fully expect he'll be starting alongside Keanu Tanavasa in BYU's 4-down alignment on the night of Portland State on August 30th. So how has he done this? How has he ultimately emerged as a key cog for Jay Hill on the defensive line? Well, let's let John Talmoiapea explain that right now on Locked On Cougars.
Looking at this, you came in last year, and I think emerged as one of the key cogs along that defensive line. Yeah. What are you looking forward to doing this year alongside guys like Keanu Tanavasa?
Man, I just look to bringing that athleticism this year. I just look to bring that dominance to the D-line. I feel like I can do really big things this year. Just coming to this D-line front, also playing with Keanu, and of course when we get Justin back and everything, man, I can't wait to dominate with those boys. And I feel like I'm gonna bring a lot to the table with my speed and with my power. I feel like we're gonna have a lot of sacks this year.
Where do you feel like you improved the most?
I feel like I just improved my technique the most. That's from my feet, my leverage, and my base and everything, and my hands, and just the violence I play with now. I feel like I just improve on just my football IQ not only, but here's my IQ playing up front. And I think, that's where I improve the most.
Okay, I got to ask you this. You play alongside him.
Yes,
I've
sir.
heard a lot about Keanu and how dominant he is.
Yes,
is
sir.
he as good as advertised?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, he is. Yes, he is. I'm not going to say anything less, but, it's been a very good blessing playing with him, and he is very good. He has taught me a lot, and we both have learned from each other. We both learned from each other how things work over here, and I also took some stuff from him, and he also took some stuff from me. So playing with him is very fun, very competitive, and I love playing with that dude.
What's it like having guys like Sione Puha, Gary Anderson working alongside you on that D-line?
Man, it's a blessing. With those guys, they just have a ton of experience. With a lot of league guys they coach, and just both of them being up at Utah now, being down here, they just have a lot of good experience. Just that's from both of them, and how much people they put out, and the knowledge they know about everything. It's such a huge blessing playing with them and everything. So yeah.
Do you think this defense can be even better this year than it was a season ago?
A lot of love. Love to that defense last year. A lot of love to all the seniors last year, just them being a role model and everything. But I do feel like we are going to make a big run because of this defense. And I feel like we're going to be way more dominant and just all-out good defense.
Where do you feel like – you experienced the Big 12 last year. You played in that bowl game against Colorado.
Yes, sir.
What's different about this year going into Big 12 play and just the season than it was maybe a season ago?
Man, I think just understanding the competition of the Big 12. I think just understanding what type of athletes we have on the O-line in the Big 12 and how they come to play. They all come play very hard, but just getting that experience last year, I feel way more comfortable this year, and I'm just able to play my football.
You talk about playing with speed.
Yeah.
Did you play some DN growing up at
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You came here as a skinnier lineman, right?
Yes, sir.
So,
yes, sir.
What's been the transformation like going from like outside to the interior?
Yeah. So, I've been playing DN all my life.
Okay.
I always thought I was a DN guy and all that stuff, but I knew when I was going to come the Big Four football, I knew I was going to have to move inside. So that transition was a little hard at first because, of course, inside you got to be a whole different breed to play inside. A lot of big boys, a lot of contact, a lot of violence up front. So the transformation playing inside was at first very difficult, but of course, playing D-line, you're always just going to have to be me. I feel like me being coached by Gary Anderson and Coach Pohart, they taught me a lot about playing inside, and I have got way better inside and everything, so I feel a lot more comfortable.
There you have it, John Tamoiapea, and a big thank you to him for taking the time to join us here on Locked On Cougars. And you can tell he's got a fun, loving personality, and he just loves playing the game of football. I hope he absolutely goes out there and kills it. Now, when Justin Kirkland is available, obviously there will be a battle for playing time at the defensive tackle position because Justin Kirkland, he's 340 pounds, and John Tamoiapea, he's tipping the scales. I think they list him at 290 pounds. So obviously there's a weight difference there, but John mentions the fact that, he doesn't necessarily have to be the biggest, but he is one of the quickest. He's had to play defensive end my entire life growing up, and I've had to adapt to playing on the interior of the defensive line. The nice part is Jay Hill's got a proven concept of moving guys, bigger defensive ends inside in BYU's defense and them succeeding. Look no further than John Nelson and Blake Mangelson a season ago. I would also expect at points this season, we've heard it from Jay Hill himself, to expect guys like Viliami Puha as well as Bodie Schoonover as their bigger bodied defensive ends to move inside in a pinch and play some defensive tackle. It's just all about making matchups and making ability for you to obviously make plays as a defensive tackle. And if John Tamoiapea, if he's quicker than some of these offensive linemen he's going up against, that's great. Go make plays in the backfield, make life a little bit easier on guys like Keanu Tanavasu, who will be the focal point of opposing teams' game plans, because I'll just put it this way. Keanu Tanavasa, one-on-one in training camp, from what I have seen, is darn near unblockable. And a lot of other Big 12 teams are going up against him are going to learn that hard truth. And I fully expect that's going to eat up double and triple teams on him, allowing John Taumaloa-Payau and the other defensive ends on BYU's roster to have more one-on-one battles, which they absolutely need to win and make life uncomfortable for opposing running backs and, more importantly, quarterbacks, as BYU's defense looks to take yet another step towards greatness this fall. All right, we'll wrap up today's show. Coming up next, we're going to talk a little bit about what we saw from the opening weekend of Utah high school football. There were three guys in particular I thought that stood out on the gridiron on Friday night that should have Cougar fans excited for the future for BYU football, and we'll talk about them next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Have you decided last minute to head to a ball game with your friends and family? I think we've all done that. Maybe it's game day, something you realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where our friends at Game Time come in. They are the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. And with the money you'll save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, even the invite to a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it all possible, my friends. They are the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, making it easy to browse the ticket for exciting Major League Baseball games. I'm a big Seattle Mariners fan. Obviously, I'll be glancing to see what the Mariners got going on. But beyond that, whether it's BYU football, an NFL team you love, if you're tired of endless scrolling to find the best deal, Game Time's zone deals pick the best seats for you in the section that you're looking in. And the best part is you can take the guesswork out of buying all your tickets and do it with our friends at Game Time. All you got to do is download the Game Time app today, create an account, and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account, redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Another plug for you guys to join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group, with the inside scoop on all things BYU sports. I'll just put it this way. Those of you who have signed up by today, I guess on Monday, you'll get some updates on what I heard about BYU scrimmage they had this past weekend. Let's just put it this way. Details on it are very sparse, but we got a few details and we pass it along to our Locked On Cougars Insider Group. So join us today. Get a 14-day free trial, carry you all the way to the first game against Portland State, and just $5 a month beyond that to be a part of the Insiders Group. Click the link in the show notes below and join us today. All right, let's talk BYU football as we go out the door here. But I want to talk about it more in the big picture of the future for BYU football, because the three players we're about to talk about are not currently members of the BYU football program. In fact, they play at different high schools across the state of Utah, but the nice part is each of them, I thought, had really, really fine performances for BYU this past weekend as Utah high school football kicked off their regular season. Now, this is not an inclusive list. I am still waiting to see some of the stats for some of the defensive players, guys like Lehigh's PJ Taki, Lopeti Mawala from Orem High School. A lot of teams take longer to get the defensive stats filed. So once I have a chance to glance at those, I may update you. So all three of these players are offensive players, but they are no less impressive because they absolutely had some monster performances, none bigger than what Brock Harris did for Pineview High School. Now, if you did not see this, go look at it on social media. Brock Harris in the first half, yes, in the first half of a high school football game, only had over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns, including, I think it was like the very first or second play of the game. He catches a little bit of a dump off pass, races up the sideline for 80 plus yards for a touchdown. He absolutely is looking like the 4-star stud. Some of you are arguing he should be a 5-star prospect that BYU thought they were getting. And I'll reiterate something that somebody told me over a year ago. So BYU has their summer camps, obviously, and a lot of prep football players like Brock Harris will come to Provo during the summer and work out, go through these camps with the BYU coaches and players. So we're going back over a year ago. So back to the summer of 2024. I had somebody in the BYU football program tell me that if Brock Harris were to suit up that year, he'd be BYU starting tight end. That was pretty high praise because he was going into his junior season. He's now a senior, and everything that I've heard about him measures up. The Harris family has been really effervescent in their praise about BYU. His dad has been active on social media. They don't mind mixing it up with Utes and telling the Utes to, pound sand. It's pretty funny to watch them do that, but that's like half of a season for some guys. Over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns in the first half. Uber impressive stuff from Brock Harris. And I think after his mission, Cougar fans can get excited that another great tight end is coming to add to a legacy of really strong tight end play at BYU. Next thing I want to talk about is actually the lowest rated commit in the BYU recruiting class, according to 24/7 Sports, and that is Ridgeline High School's Graham Livingston. Now, his little brother Hayden Livingston is working on BYU staff as an analyst right now, was a standout safety. Well, Graham is an absolute dynamite wide receiver. He had 17 catches, 179 yards, and matched Brock Harris with 3 touchdowns and a 34-14 win over 3A powerhouse Morgan. Ridgeline is an absolute powerhouse in the 4A ranks this year, but Morgan, they were otherworldly a season ago, and BYU, soon to be BYU for Graham Livingston, but Ridgeline snapped that win streak from Morgan. I stretched like 13 or 14 games in a row. And Graham Livingston, 17 catches, 179 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Another impressive performance. And I think the thing we lose sight of, you obviously have the top end talents like a Ryder Lyons, like a Brock Harris in this recruiting class. But then you look at Graham Livingston, maybe the lowest rated guy. But there's a reason why BYU is so intent on bringing him in, because he's just uber productive as a wide receiver. It's awesome to see that stat line. And congratulations to Graham on having a standout performance on Friday night. The last guy I want to mention is Legend Glasker. Much like Graham Livingston, he's a wide receiver prospect coming to BYU. Legend Glasker had 2 touchdown receptions for Lehigh. They shut out Maple Mountain 55-0. As I mentioned, PJ Taki. I've not seen his stats yet, and I hope to update you on how PJ did. But another guy that BYU is recruiting, hasn't taken a commitment from him yet because he hasn't decided yet, is Devon Eka. The running back for Lehigh. He also had a hat trick of touchdowns, running in for 3 scores in that 55-0 shutout. But Legend Glasker had a monster back half of the season last year after sitting out the first 5 games of the year due to transfer rules at BYU, at Lehigh High School. He's also going to be at BYU at some point. But his start of the season, very, very strong with those 2 touchdowns for Lehigh High. And I love the fact that these guys are already showing out in the very first week of the prep football season. BYU wants top-end talent in its football program, and this trio, they absolutely scream exactly that for the BYU Cougars. And that should excite you as a Cougar fan, thinking about what could be if these guys live up to their potential. There's a reason why programs like Georgia were so intent on getting a guy like Brock Harris into their football program, because they saw him as like a Brock Bowers, albeit supersized, because Brock Harris is 6'5" or 6'6", whereas Brock Bowers, I think, is like 6'3". And watching, I hesitated to put the highlights up because it's not on a huddle, the film highlight yet, putting it up on this podcast, or else I would, because YouTube will flag stuff if I put, copyrighted material up there. The bigger point is, Brock Harris looks like a literal man amongst boys out there, and that's exactly what you want to see. Same thing you want to see from Graham Livingston, playing for another strong program in Ridgeline. Legend Glasker is part of a loaded Lehigh team that's looking to make an impression in the 6A ranks this year. All 3 of them, I thought, had fantastic performances, and we'll do this more going forward, kind of highlighting different guys, because this 2026 recruiting class, it's got a lot of talent, as we've talked about. It's a historic type class for BYU, and the hope is that more of these guys have big performances like this going forward. All right, before we go, also, I do need a shout out. Congratulations to BYU incoming freshman Kihei Akina. He just won the Utah Open, a professional tournament, albeit he is an amateur, so he obviously hoisted the trophy, but did not get the money. But he won the Utah Open, becoming the youngest winner in Utah Open history in the 99 years that this tournament's been being held. So congratulations to Kihei. There have been so many people who have mentioned that there's a lot of 5-star type talents coming to BYU. Do not ignore Kihei Akina. We're talking the who's who of college golf, especially those like Alabama, Oklahoma State, etc. They wanted this kid to come play for him. He decided to come just down the road from Lone Peak High School and play for his hometown team at BYU, and to win a professional tournament against some pretty strong contenders in that field. Show what this kid's made of. He's got everything, and the hope is that he helps lead BYU to a strong golf season this fall, going into next spring as well, because they split the season obviously over the fall and spring semesters. But really cool stuff to see that from Kihei Akina. And then finally, BYU women's soccer, if you did not see it this past weekend, absorbed an early red card, and then ultimately just down a woman, I should say in this case, ended up scoring 3 goals to upset number 24 Minnesota in their season opener. And they are back in action tonight, taking on Cal Poly down in California. It's a 7:00 Mountain Time start for the women's soccer program. And I'll just say this, Jennifer Rockwood, she's a living legend. And if I know BYU's not really into putting up like the whole like statue thing, because I think Lavelle Edwards deserves a statue, as well as some of the great BYU quarterbacks of yesteryear. But if they're not going to rename South Field Jennifer Rockwood field at some point in the future, I'd be very, very stunned because she is absolutely everything that BYU has needed in a soccer coach. And she's the architect of what has been an absolute dominant run for BYU women's soccer over the years. Obviously, some college cup appearances and the like, and really cool to see that. And congratulations to the women's soccer program starting off their season on a very, very strong note. All right, that's going to do it for today's edition of the podcast. As always, cannot thank you guys enough for continued support of the show. Please continue to subscribe, rate, review, share with your family and friends. And as always, make sure you're an everydayer right here on the podcast. And also, I want to tease ahead real quick to tomorrow. I'm going to catch up with Kelly Papinga, defensive ends coach. I guess edges coach is technically his title, if I recall correctly. But what is going to be a key to BYU's pass rush being even better in 2025? He'll explain that on tomorrow's edition of the podcast. And also want to remind you guys, make sure you check out the Portal podcast as your next listen. It's a great way to keep up with all the new news in college football, trends, recruiting, whatever's new in college football. The Portal podcast and Brian, their hosts, have absolutely got it covered for you guys from top to bottom. So as always, thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day, and thank you for being everydayers right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.